Classic comic artist Russ Heath had a career that lasted over 60 years and has a hallowed reputation among art aficionados for his amazing realism, grit, and detail. And he went from comics into commercial art, advertising, cartoons. He did just about everything, but he hardly ever did superhero comics. But he did have a run-in with Batman, and he told us all about it, along with his surprisingly critical appraisal of his work, and also other comic creators who have impressed him with their work on Batman. And that's all coming up on Hero Journalism. Hello heroes, 4K'd here with a closer look at longtime artist Russ Heath, who passed away on August 23, 2018. Heath was a consummate professional, one of the most highly respected among his peers, but when I asked him about his animation work and the process of adapting the source material, what you stay true to and what you create fresh and new, it made him think of Batman and the process of newer generations of artists bringing their own take to the character. And he even named some of his favorite Batman artists, favoring the newer generation over his Golden Age peers.
Well, I think, for instance, let's talk about Batman. The original Batman comic books were, and the strip itself in the newspapers was, back in the beginning, it wasn't very well drawn. Pretty bad, the old stuff. And so when people like Neil Adams and so on brought a whole change to the industry in general as to having things well drawn, and any if you change something and it's for the better, that's good. And if it's turns into a clown, it's not. So I wouldn't have any hesitation about. I don't think there were a lot of changes done to Batman, but it was certainly drawn by much more capable people. I mean, right down to Alex Ross. I mean, who could you name that could do any better than that? Certainly not me.
It makes perfect sense that an artist like Heath, who was known for his grittiness and realism, would be a fan of Neil Adams and Alex Ross, with Ross's art often being called photorealistic, and Neil Adams's art often being called dynamic realism, stylized heroics with a texture of reality. But then Heath shifted to his own work on Batman, and he was surprisingly harsh in his appraisal.
I did a Batman thing myself. Legends of the Dark Knight was the name of the book, and I think it was a failure. I don't know what. Of course, I don't. Must be an indication, since they didn't get me to do any more. That is an opinion in itself.
Now, at this point, I've got to mention I collected comics in the 90s. The Tim Burton Batman movies got me back into the comic shops, and I remember this 4-part story. I was a big fan of the Legends of the Dark Knight series, how it could move around at any point in Batman's career, and this storyline made use of that, flashing back to a newer Batman and his first encounter with Catwoman and their uneasy alliance against Catman. And Catman was pretty badass. Unfortunately, he was reimagined for the story as a psychotic serial killer, but he was still pretty tough and dealt some serious damage to Batman, which would presage his post-millennial reboot from recent years. And the story by Doug Mensch explored urban racial tensions at a time when Rodney King and the LA riots were still fresh in our memory. This type of heady material was a good match for Heath's literal art style, so I think that Heath was a little too hard on his work, but it doesn't surprise me considering he was a relentless perfectionist.
And I am the first one to say I made the mistake of not getting into the spirit and feeling of maybe the dark side or something interesting about Batman and who he was, because I had never done superheroes. Of course, he's not a superhero, but he's a costumed hero. And I'm so literal that when I did it, I said, this doesn't look right. It looks like a guy going to a masquerade in a Batman costume. It wasn't, I didn't suspend and go for the feel. I should have researched it and gotten into what the creator of him was trying to make him be. And I noticed there's a lot more of that now, just from the first movies to the later ones, that they're at least aware of the problem and trying to do it.
That was the late Russ Heath talking about his favorite Batman artists and being a little self-deprecating about his own work on the character. We have more interviews from classic creators of film, comics, and cartoons coming soon, and we'll see you here next time on Hero Journalism.